Hello, friends, and welcome to Science Talk. I am your host, Jim Massa. So, in this video segment, I want to discuss what we see right here for the title. Here are 5 of the main reasons people continue to deny climate change. Now, before we delve into this article written by Dr. Mark Maslin, I want to take a moment to discuss this graphic here. What is this graphic? Temperature differences from normal around the globe average over the last 5 years. Now, you probably can't see the scale here, but basically where it's white is average temperature, so no deviation from normal, baseline data, if you will. Where it gets the blue, it's cooler than the average, and red, it's really warmer than average, so it's baking hot. Notice where it's red, the Arctic. The Arctic is the fastest growing region. In fact, if you look at the entire planet, at least 92% of the entire surface of the planet is experiencing warmer than average temperature. In other words, the planet is warming. And it's warming at a fast rate, and it's due to humans. That is established science, right? When there's over 16,000 papers in the peer-reviewed journals from scientists from all over the world, and out of those 16,000 plus papers, only 38 say there's no global warming or humans are not the cause of it. That is as close to a scientific consensus, unanimous consensus you're ever going to find. So the science is well established. When people want to tell you that the science is not established, that's bullshit. So we look at this here. This is the North Atlantic Oscillation, by the way, right there. Right? Off there, could be depending on what part of the PDO ENSO cycles you're at, and so on. This is off Antarctica. You've got, some cold water currents coming off near the continent, and so on. And look at here, it's 2014 to 2018. So that kind of 5-year period. The planet's warming up. Okay. So let's look at this article here. The fossil fuel industry, political lobbyists, media moguls, and individuals spent the past 30 years sowing doubt about the reality of climate change where none exists. We have documentation that Exxon in the 70s were aware that putting CO2 into the atmosphere will warm the planet. They knew it back then. That goes back over 40 years. They chose to disembark on this denial campaign. And then you have the Reagan administration with James Watt as the head of the EPA, that lunatic loser. And, what is the Reagan administration known for? A new word in our lexicon, disinformation. In other words, we won't call it a lie. It's just disinformation. And the problem is because of declining educational standards in this country, along with just the overall scientific illiteracy of people here, people have bought hook, line, and sink that, there's some doubt, the scientists don't know, humans aren't really doing things, when the opposite is totally true. So I kind of like this article because it kind of succinctly sums up the problem of all this denial bullshit going on. The latest estimate is that the world's 5 largest publicly owned oil and gas companies spend around $200 million a year on lobbying to control, delay, or block binding climate policy. Remember, the Paris Accord was non-binding. It's just a suggestion. Almost like in certain areas of the planet, stop signs, just a suggestion. Their hold on the public seems to be waning. 2 recent polls suggested over 75% of Americans think humans are causing climate change. The problem is the other 25% are the loud ones. School climate strikes, Extinction Rebellion protests, national governments declaring a climate emergency. Not here in the US, though. Although the Pentagon says climate change is a national security issue. Mainly because now they'll have to defend the Arctic. I just read an interesting article in Tom Dispatch written by Michael Clare. We talked about World War III possibly starting, being fought up in the Arctic. Well, definitely starting up there. It's an interesting read. Go check it out. Improved media coverage of climate change for those non-corporate medias. An increasing number of extreme weather events, basically saying we can't ignore this shit anymore. And they've all contributed to the shift. There also seems to be a renewed optimism we can deal with the crisis. I'm not optimistic, but that's me. But this means lobbying has changed, now employing more subtle and more vicious approaches, which has been termed as climate sadism. It is used to mock young people going on climate protests and to ridicule Greta Thunberg, the H is silent in Sweden, she's now 17 years old, young woman who happens to have Asperger's, who's simply telling the scientific truth. So now here's this little graphic that tells you how much money in millions of US dollars that oil firms spend on climate lobbying. BP, the highest at 53, Shell at 49, ExxonMobil 41, Chevron 29, and total 29. 201 million when you add them all up. So let's look at the 5 reasons why there's still climate deniers out there. Science, let's start with that. All right, it's the type of denial we're all familiar with. The science of climate change is not settled. Deniers suggest climate change is part of the natural cycle, or climate models are unreliable and too sensitive to CO2. Some even suggest that CO2 is such a small part of the atmosphere, it cannot have a large heating effect. That is an example of scientific illiteracy, or that climate scientists are fixing the data to show the climate is changing. A global conspiracy that would take thousands of scientists in more than 100 countries to pull off. And this is one that really pisses me off. We are not out to fix the data. We don't have an agenda other than to basically do the best data collection and analysis we can and to disseminate our findings and with the best understanding that we have. As to the models unreliable, I have stated on this channel many times that when we develop models, we enter all the data, we enter in all our equations and crank them through. And when we get the models to accurately reproduce what has already been observed, only then, and we already been observed with at least a minimal of 95% accuracy, only then do we extrapolate. If our model only gives us a 30% accuracy, we're not going to say, well, fuck this. We're not going to use it to extrapolate out. It's not reliable. You need to work on the model. So again, people not knowing science, and then they go and basically flap their gums. As far as CO2, climate change is part of the natural cycle. Yes, there's been climate change as part of the natural cycle. It's the rate of change. How many times have you heard me stress this point on this channel? It's the rate of change. Quite bluntly put, it's the fastest we have data for going back hundreds of millions of years of Earth's history. All these arguments are false. There you go. This is basically saying, that's his nice way of saying bullshit. There's a clear consensus among scientists about the causes of climate change. As I just said, out of 16,000 plus papers, only 38 say And a review of those 38 papers indicated major flaws in the assumptions made, the analyses, the methodologies used, the conclusions, etc. I did a video segment on that some time ago. You might want to look for that. The climate models that predict global temperature rises have remained very similar over the last 30 years, despite its huge increase in complexity, showing it as a robust outcome of the science. Translation, we know what we're doing, and we have it right. That's basically what that states. Now, climate models and observations over the last basically 50 years almost, okay, 47 if you look at the, and the model mean, and they have NOAA globe temperature, NASA, GIS temp, Berkeley, Hadley, all these different people. And so what we see here is 1970, here's 2020, where they projected it out to. And what do we see here? Okay, this is degree C anomaly. In other words, how much deviation from normal. Now, if this is, random, or statistically neutral, if you will, we would expect to see an equal number, warmer than the normal and cooler than the normal. We expect to see an equal number of that. We don't here. What do we see? It's just going up. So, owing that to randomness and statistical chance is a very low probability. So in other words, what this is telling us is that there is a definite trend, and that definite trend is the planet is warming. So what's this gray here? The gray is the confidence interval placed around whatever the mean the different models are calculating. Probably most like a 95% confidence. So in other words, the true value, if I just take this point here, the true value would be between 0.8 and looks like 0.2 increase. So 0.2 to 0.8 deviation above the normal is be where the true value lies. So it's a confidence interval, like putting errors around the measurement. As an example, if I measure the mean is 100, but I calculate a confidence interval based on standard error, which includes the standard deviation, which is a measure of spread, I might have 90 my 100 plus or minus 10. So the true mean would be between 90 and 110. That's what that's saying. That's an example to illustrate what is going on in this graphic. Because unless you sample every single individual of a population, you're never going to know the true mean. If I give a test to 100 students and I want to know the average of that class, yes, I can then find an average for all 100 students, and I know that's the true mean. They will, I can measure standard deviation of spread, but I know what the true mean is. But if I want to measure the length of a moose rack in Alaska, in the Tanana Flats, I'm not going to be able to sample all of bull moose out there. I get an estimate, and the estimate, then you put errors around it. That's statistics. If you're interested, I do have some videos on basic statistics that you can check out. The shift in public opinion means that undermining the science will increasingly have little or no effect, so climate change deniers are switching to new tactics. One of Britain's leading deniers, Nigel Lawson, the former UK Chancellor, now agrees that humans are causing climate change, despite having founded the skeptic Global Warming Policy Foundation in 2009. Okay, economic denial. The idea that climate change is too expensive to fix is a more subtle form of climate denial. Economists, however, suggest we could fix climate change now by spending 1% of world GDP. Now, I'm not an economist, so I can't really speak to that. Professor Richard Wolff has spoken to this on occasion. So he's got a website called Democracy at Work, a YouTube channel as well. So you can go there if you want to get more of the economic side of things. But basically what's saying is perhaps even less if the cost savings from improved human health and expansion of global green economy are taken into account. Okay. But if we don't act now, by 2050, it could cost over 20% of world GDP. So spend 1%, wait 30 years, spend 20%, assuming it's not too late in 30 years. So what I'm basically saying is that invest 1% of the GDP into what's been called this global green economy. Developing renewable energies, just, every aspect that the green economy, sometimes referred to as Green New Deal here in the U.S., refers to. You should also remember that in 2018, the world generated 36912. So that's 8.6 times 10 to the 13 US dollars. I guess that's trillions. Let's see, millions, billions. Yeah, it's $86 trillion. And every year, this world GDP grows by 3.5%. So setting aside just 1% to deal with climate change would make little overall difference and would save the world a huge amount of money. So you'll still be gaining 2.5 in growth. I can't argue with that. That I can deal with that math. Why the climate change deniers also forget to tell you is that they are protecting, this is key, they're protecting a fossil fuel industry that receives $5.2 trillion in annual subsidies. Now, here in the U.S., you got, how are we going to pay for this? How are we going to pay for Medicare for all? How are we going to pay for public, free colleges, blah, blah, blah. We can't have socialism. This is freaking socialism. Just giving out that much money to freaking corporations that don't bloody need it. That's socialism. We can't have socialism. Public roads, public schools, police, fire, public parks, garbage pickups, Medicare, Medicaid, Social Security. There's social programs in the U.S. So I hear that we can't have socialism arguments. Well, you're just a bloody idiot. You don't know what you're talking about. But this really ticks me out. How are you going to pay for all this stuff? There's all these damn wars and bases around the planet. But $5.2 trillion. Think what we can do with $5.2 trillion here in the U.S. With the Green New Deal, with the making Social Security solvent and education, all that kind of stuff. Ridiculous. The political system here in the U.S. The IMF estimates that efficient fossil fuel pricing would lower global carbon emissions by 28%, not insignificant. Fossil fuel air pollution deaths by 46%, increased government revenue by 3.8% of the country's GDP. Now we come to the third aspect, humanitarian denial. Climate change deniers also argue that climate change is good for us. Longer, warmer summers in the temperate zone will make farming more productive. Except that plants, like organisms, have preferred temperature ranges. If it gets too damn warm, the plants are going to wither and die. Most of the plants that we use for human consumption are C3 plants, meaning that they don't like temperatures too much above 86 degrees Fahrenheit. They start dying because they lose too much water. Transpiration rates increase out there at stomata. Again, these are people who don't know science. They're scientifically illiterate. Now, I don't expect the average person to know what a C3 and a C4 plant is, but just do a little digging and you will find that information out. These gains are often offset by drier summers, increased frequency of heat waves. Yeah, it kills the plants. The only crop that humans is commercially important for humans that's a C4 plant is corn, and even they have their limits. In the 2010 Moscow heat wave killed 11,000 people. It ruined the Russian wheat harvest. And by the way, I have done stories, and I've got more coming down the pipe, of how high temperatures and or high humidities are basically reducing significantly crop yield, as well as the nutritional value of the crops. And if you have less food, guess what? There's going to be more demand on what's available. The price is going to go up, and people are going to go hungry more and more. More than 40% of the world's population lives in the tropics, where from both a human health perspective and an increase in desertification, no one wants summer temperatures to rise. Another problem with warmer temperatures is it promotes the spread of pathogens, be it bacteria, be it virus, be it through an organism that's a vector for whatever pathogen is carrying. For example, mosquitoes, the Anopheles mosquitoes, malaria, and so on, as an example. So warmer temperatures will lead to disease spreads more readily, especially when they move from the tropics into the subtemperate. The deniers also point out that plants need atmospheric CO2 to grow, so having more of it acts like a fertilizer. This is true to a point, and the land biosphere has been absorbing about a quarter of our carbon dioxide pollution every year, and another quarter is absorbed by the oceans, making the oceans more acidic and warmer. But losing massive areas of natural vegetation through deforestation and changes in land use nullifies this minor fertilization effect. In other words, clear cutting the forest, burning down the forest, as Bolsonaro is doing in Brazil, which is clear cutting to have farmland. Okay? A grassland absorbs less CO2 than a forest does. So, yes, there may be some benefits to that, but it's more than offset by these other practices. Climate change deniers will tell you more people die of the cold than heat, so warmer winters will be a good thing. That's disingenuous. Vulnerable people die of the cold because of poor housing and not being able to afford to heat their homes. So society is killing them because there are no social safety net programs in place. And this argument is also factually incorrect. In the US, for example, heat-related deaths are 4 times higher than cold-related ones. And that may be an underestimate. As many heat-related deaths are recorded by cause of death such as heart failure, stroke, respiratory failure, which can be brought on by excessive heat. And the older a person gets, and this is true for most mammals, the more difficult it is to correctly thermoregulate. So that in the case that oftentimes hyperthermia can become a problem. Older body's not able to keep the body temperature where it needs to be. Has a more difficult time of it. So here's a graph showing weather fatalities, and this is from the National Weather Service. Weather fatalities for 2018 are in red. 10-year average is in this light blue. 30-year average is in yellow. So we have flood, lightning, tornado, hurricane, heat, winter, cold, wind, rip currents. Okay? So basically you have people going to the beach and a rip current takes them out to sea. That can affect anyone. But look at the heat from the 30-year average, 136, 108 in 2018. Winter and cold, you can see that it is, just look at the 30-year average. It's much less. And so this is nearly 4 times from winter. Summer heat causes 4 times as much death as winter and the cold. So you can do all your denying for those climate deniers. We've got data. And the data basically says, you're wrong. Then we have political denial. Climate change deniers argue we cannot take action because other countries are not taking action. But not all countries are equally guilty. And basically what tends to happen is those countries that contribute the least are the ones that are hit the hardest. The Maldives, low-lying areas in Asia, like Thailand, Vietnam, India, Bangladesh, those regions. They're not really contributing that much CO2 to the overall, and yet they're being hit the hardest. Just sea level rise alone will inundate them. They'll permanently flood them out or have chronic flooding in many of these places. 25% of the human-produced CO2 in the atmosphere is generated by the U.S., another 22% by the EU. Africa produces just under 5%. So given historic legacy of greenhouse gas pollution, developed countries have an ethical responsibility to lead the way in cutting emissions. Ultimately, all countries, of course, need to act. And if we want to really minimize the effects, we need to go by carbon zero by 2050. So let's look at the per capita tons of CO2. China 7, US 16.6. Look at Saudi Arabia. That's the highest, 18.1. Again, this is by capita, per capita. Canada's 15.3, South Korea 12.4. The world average. If you look at the US is 16.6. It's about what? The US is about 3.5 times the world average. India is the lowest at 2. Russia, Didn't mean for it to increase that way. That was a little surprise. And then the EU, okay, cumulative emissions, 25%, 22%, China 13%, Russia 7%, rest of the world 26%. This tells you who's mostly responsible. Deniers also tell you that there are problems to fix closer to home without bothering with global issues, but many of the solutions to climate change are win-win and will improve the lives of normal people. Okay? You hear people saying, well, we can't stop, burning coal because then all the coal miners lose their jobs. But if you transition them to green energy jobs, okay, they have a job still, and it'll probably be a better paying job, and we're going to a new energy source, which will be better for the climate. So that's an example of a win-win. Switching to renewable energy and electric vehicles reduces air pollution and improves people's overall health. Little cautionary note here about electric vehicles. You still have to plug them in. And right now, to recharge an electric vehicle, when you plug them in, you're doing what? The utility company is burning coal or gas. Still got the issue. Now, what you have to do is say, okay, if I run a gasoline vehicle with a given efficiency, this is how much CO2 is put in the atmosphere. For the same distance driven on an electric vehicle to charge it up, we probably find that the equivalent amount of CO2 put in the atmosphere will be considerably less to charge up the electric vehicle than to drive a gasoline-driven vehicle. So when you sum it up over a cumulative effect of more and more people using electric cars, then yes, the overall fossil fuel usage should go down. But just keep that in mind. Electric vehicles, when you plug them in, you're using a fossil fuel to recharge it. Chances are, though, it's less energy to give you a full battery charge so that you are reducing your carbon footprint. Developing a green economy provides economic benefits, creates jobs, improving the environment. Reforestation provides protection from extreme weather events and can, in turn, improve food, water security. And then crisis denial. That's just denying the fact there's a crisis. Final piece of climate change denial is the argument that we should not rush into changing things, especially given the uncertainty raised by the other 4 areas of denial above. In other words, let's fiddle while Rome burns. And case of Australia, literally. Case of Paradise, California, a couple of years back, literally. Alaska, literally. Sweden, last 2018 summer, they had a big forest fires well above the Arctic Circle there. Deniers argue that climate change is not as bad as scientists make out. We'll be much richer in the future and better able to fix the climate change. Translation: let's just kick the ball down the field, down the road. Kick the can. That's right. That's the metaphor. Let's just kick the can down the road. They also play on our emotions that many of us don't like change and can feel we're living in the best of times, blah, blah, blah. Similarly, hollow arguments were used in the past to delay ending slavery, granting the vote to women, ending colonial rule, ending segregation, decriminalizing homosexuality, bolstering workers' rights, environmental regulations, allowing same-sex marriages, and banning smoking. And unfortunately, a lot of the gains made, like segregation, ending segregation, decriminalizing homosexuality and workers' rights, environmental regulations, a lot of the gains that were made have been lost in the last several decades. Sad to say. The fundamental question is, why are we allowing the people with the most privilege and power to convince us to delay saving our planet from climate change? And Dr. Mark Maslin, he's a professor of Earth Science, Earth System Science at UCL. So I like this article because it succinctly summarizes basically the bulk of the climate change deniers, but breaks it down into the different categories so you can understand where they're coming from. We just have to fight them back. Because, and I will close with this statement, a good planet is hard to find. There, whole planet's warming up. Thank you for your time. Hey folks, this is Jim here with Science Talk. I wanted to give a shout out to Whitney Alex and her channel. Her channel is The Green Report. She basically covers headline news involving environmental and climate issues. So once again, it's The Green Report. Go check it out. She does some very nice presentations. Hello folks, this is Jim here with Science Talk, asking you to please subscribe to my channel and to inform others of my channel and of the work that I do. Please share to social media platforms that you use. Also, as a reminder, don't forget to click the bell so that you know when I load up more videos. Finally, I ask that you support the work that I do by becoming a patron at patreon.com. Details in the description box below. Thank you for your support.